few well-placed hits. I don't know. I felt like I threw better than 5 runs, but somehow I gave up 5 runs. So it's not happening right now, one way or the other. It's really frustrating.
That's Rockies losing pitcher Jason Jennings, who allowed 5 runs on 8 hits in 6 innings to suffer the loss. He's now 7-12. That loss being last night in Los Angeles to the Dodgers by a score of 6-3. As we welcome you back to Sports Saturday, I'm joined by our Major League Baseball insider, Ralph Widlic. Ralph, the Rockies now a season low, 10 games under 500. And it seems that something is going to break with this team soon. They've already collapsed in one way, but when you look at the state of the Rockies, Ralph, what's going to crack first? Is it the ownership? Is it the general manager's going to be replaced? Is it Clint Hurdle or maybe some player changes? What's going to happen to change the face and the state of this organization, Ralph? Because obviously they go in the same direction year in and year out.
Yeah, John, I think we saw the beginning of the changes a week ago when Chris Iannetta was brought up from Colorado Springs as a catcher. I think that was the initial surge, so to speak. Troy Tulowitzki coming up midweek, starting at shortstop is step number 2. Vinny Castilla coming up, obviously only in a pinch hitting role, and occasionally to spell maybe a Todd Helton or a Garrett Atkins, who, by the way, continues to indicate that he is the best hitter on his ball club. I'm talking about Garrett Atkins. Day in and day out, he's the most consistent. I think that's what you're seeing right now, and I think that's what you're going to see for the future. Coming in, Jeff Baker is going to make an appearance, probably as a right fielder, a right-handed bat, to see what he can do from that side of the plate. Brad Hopp, I think the team is quite disappointed in Brad Hopp. Don't be surprised if the team starts looking for a everyday right fielder next year or during the off season. I think that is something. I also think the Rockies are going to make a splurge, so to speak. And when I talk about a splurge, maybe it's the wrong word, because this team has not made a splurge in a free agent market in the last 5 years. But I think we're going to see this team spend a couple bucks and look for some everyday players, such as a center fielder and as an everyday right fielder, if they figure the combination of Baker and Hopp cannot get the job done. But I think for the present, John, I don't think we're going to see Dan O'Dowd or Clint Hurdle leave this team for at least another year. They got a contract extension. As we know, this team doesn't like to move people when they have an extra year or so in a contract, regardless of their success or failure. In this case, 10 games under 500, as you said earlier, it's got to be considered to be a failure. I don't think there's any question about that. I think this team had great expectations, or certainly expectations this year, to improve upon last year. As it stands right now, based upon the type of ball they're playing right now, based upon the fact that they're 10 games under 500 and they haven't really played decent ball in the last 3.5 weeks, this team has got to be considered to be a failure. So no question about that going into next year. Dan O'Dowd and Clint Hurdle will be very definitely under the gun, and they should be. No doubt about that, John. They should be. You can't make any excuses for the two of them. You can't say they haven't had enough time. You can't say they haven't had time to develop the players. You can't say the players really haven't proven themselves. I mean, it's all up to Hurdle and it's all up to O'Dowd to get the right players on the field, to make the right impression, and above all, to improve the quality of their play. And when you take a look at this team right now, this team is playing no better ball today than they did the first day of spring training back in March in Tucson, Arizona. This team is making the same mistakes. They're faltering. They're making base running mistakes. They're making errors on the field. And the pitching staff is beginning to wear down. You could tell Jason Jennings, I mean, you're not going to listen to a soundbite from a starting pitcher who gives up 5 runs and sounds like he just celebrated his 25th birthday with a gorgeous blonde around his waist. I mean, that's not going to happen. You know, I mean, that's not the situation. Jason Jennings sounds down in the mouth, but he is down in the mouth because he's not pitching well. He's pitched his heart out for this team. This team has not responded with any kind of offensive production when he pitches, and now he's suffering. Now he's not making the pitches he made a month and a half ago. And that's pretty much to be said for virtually every starter on this team, aside from Jeff Francis. And even Jeff Francis hasn't been that sharp of late, but he's hung in there, and he's won some big games for him. When I say big, only because he stopped some losing streaks. He seems to be the stopper as it stands right now. But anyway, this team has got a long way to go, John.
And yet, Ralph,
I do believe that Yes, go ahead.
The pitching staff has been the healthiest in all of the National League all season, and they're still 10 games under 500. And my question is, getting back to the free agency, did the Rockies not have the money to spend on free agents going into this season, or did O'Dowd and the Monfort clan there believe that they could actually produce a winning product having all of these young players and no strong veteran leadership outside of a disappointing Todd Helton?
John, I think with the Monforts and O'Dowd and a Hurdle, and he's part of their strategy, no question about it. He's part of that strategical team that they put together every year. I think they believe that they could make an improvement over last year with the same faces, so to speak, in this year's lineup. I don't think there's any question about that. They added a couple of pieces, no question. They added Jose Mesa. They added Ray King to strengthen the bullpen. They added Mike DeJean, who unfortunately has missed virtually 95% of the season, obviously, and he was going to help the bullpen. That's pretty much where they went. They did take a look at the catching situation, and they thought Yorvi Torrealba would be the answer to their catching woes. Torrealba missed the first 2 months of the season because of an injury. So that's pretty much where they wanted to go. They felt the strength would come from the growth of the players that they put on the field last year, along with the 4 players I just mentioned, added to the team this year. And that's pretty much what they thought. They really went into the season thinking that Zach Day, Josh Fogg, and B.H. Kim together would put together a decent season in the 4 and 5 roles in the rotation. Well, Fogg and Kim, for the most part, have pitched quite well. I think they've been quite surprising. However, you start looking at the numbers, John. Fogg and Kim have really faltered in this last month of the season to date, and we still have a month to go. And this team doesn't really have any young prospects, starting prospects, in the minor leagues. I mean, they brought out Campos. He looks pretty good. Ramirez looks pretty good. But both of these guys right now seem to be relievers rather than starters. That could change in the future, no question about that. Especially Corpus. Corpus could be a starter in the future. They like him. Jeremy Affeldt, who they picked up at the trading deadline for Ryan Shealy, has started in the major leagues. And if he's healthy and he doesn't have the blister problems that plagued him with Kansas City, he could also be a starter. So I think that's where they're looking, because I think the money they're going to spend will be on everyday position players, primarily outfielders, as I mentioned, because I think they like Tulowitzki very, very much at shortstop, and I think he's going to improve as we see in the next several weeks. They give us some indication what kind of a major league player he'll be in the future. But, John, I really believe that's the way they looked at it last year. A slight improvement over 2005 going into this season. I think this season has been a major disappointment the way it's winding down right now. If they turn this thing around and win 5, 6, 7 games in a row and end up the season under the double-digit 500 deficiency situation, if they win less than, or if they struggle to basically find a ways 5 to 7 to 8 games under 500, I think in some ways it'll be considered to be a success, and that's going to be a pretty hard sell, quite honestly, to the fans. But I think in some way they think they can sell that job, but they're going to have to do something in the offseason.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
They're not going to sit back on the hands and watch the same thing happen year in and year out.
Yeah, the Rockies have as many wins as the Dodgers do losses, and the Rockies have as many losses as the Dodgers do wins. The Dodgers have won 6 in a row. We'll get into the NL West. But, Ralph, I'm convinced that you and any other Major League Baseball expert would have called somebody insane on May 22nd when the Rockies had a 13-game advantage over the depleted Florida Marlins. Rockies were 25-19, the Marlins 11-31. And if I would have told you, Ralph, the Marlins will have a better record by September 1st than the Rockies, and I think you and everybody else would have said that is definitely not going to happen. And I think that just adds to the disappointment of the season when you consider that the Marlins are even younger than the Rockies, and they both came into the league in the same year, in 1993.
Yes, and the Marlins are flashing World Series rings. How do you like that? The Rockies are flashing absolutely nothing. What do you get when you're a wild card? Do they give you anything? They give you a postage stamp? I have no idea what they give you. I don't think they give you anything, quite honestly. And that's all the Rockies have really proven. And that was a strange season to begin with. So when you take a look at this, there's no doubt about the fact that the Marlin organization, in spite of the fact that they've gone through ownership changes, many various managers, some of whom have been successful, some of whom have not been successful, they've got something that going for down in Florida that the Rockies don't have, and that's one word: success. You know, they can rip that team apart. They can do whatever they seem to want to do, and yet they have the ways of coming up with some great young pitchers, some everyday ball players that just seem to, ignite the team and take it off. And Joe Girardi, who I felt so sorry for sometime in the middle of May when you talked about, when you just mentioned the fact that this team was playing horrendous baseball, it looked like they had no future whatsoever. Joe Girardi has some way to put this team back together. The young kids started playing every day. They had a lot of confidence shown in them by their manager, Joe Girardi, and their coaching staff, and they've done a heck of a job. They've done a fantastic job. And they've got some nice young players out there right now. And as you said, John, they are younger than the Rocky players, and we keep on saying, you know, the young Rocks and so forth, the R generation, all the publicity generated by the Rockies' publicity staff. And quite honestly, the Florida Marlins are a better young team than the Colorado Rockies are as constituted right now, and that's obvious. That's obvious to anybody. You take a look at the one-loss record, and people will tell you that the NL East is still a tougher division than the NL West. So Florida is doing the job, and Joe Girardi's got my vote for manager of the year, John, and I know you feel the same way. This guy has done a fantastic year job managing this team, and the possibility is, and maybe the probability is, he will not finish off his contract with the Marlins. There's a good possibility because of his run-in with owner Jeffrey Loria the other day. He may be running the Chicago Cubs when we speak about this situation a year from now.
Well, everybody's getting along, obviously, in the Dodgers organization. That had a huge winning streak just a few weeks ago. Now they've won 6 in a row. Ralph, when you look at this team, and it's ironic that the Dodgers have been so hot, and yet in all of baseball, they have the shortest division lead at only 4 games. I don't think there's any question here that they're going to win this particular division. But now, how would you rank them in terms of National League teams? Would they be number 2 on your list now, or are they behind St. Louis as well, and maybe some other club you're looking at?
Well, when you take a look at the situation, that's really an interesting proposition, John. They're virtually in a red-hot, a flat-footed tie, as they say, with the St. Louis Cardinals with regards to one-loss records. I mean, they're pretty much there. I mean, they really are. But I really believe that they've got a better starting pitching staff, obviously, than the Cardinals. I think their bullpen certainly is as decent as the Cardinals. The Cardinals don't have a great bullpen. I don't think Isringhausen is something that you're going to depend upon day in and day out. We've talked about him in the past. Their everyday lineup I like better than the St. Louis Cardinals. So I would say right now, in spite of the fact that their lead is a bit shorter than the St. Louis Cardinals, it's still a situation. I think they're a better ball club. I really do believe they're a better ball club than the Cardinals, especially with Mulder going down now for the rest of the season. The Cardinals are looking around for any kind of pitching, and basically Chris Carpenter's the only guy that stands up and says, "Give me the ball." So I've got to like the Dodgers in a better situation now than the St. Louis Cardinals. I certainly think the Mets are the strong team in that division. That doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. But the NL West, I mean, I like the Mets number 1 right now. I like the Dodgers, believe it or not, number 2. And anybody that comes out of the Central Division number 3. And don't ask me about the wild card, John, because that wild card situation is so screwed up. I mean, it changes every day, John. It really does. You know that. And, I mean, it's an unbelievable situation. I mean, Houston has every chance in the world, even playing as poorly as they had been playing. Now they're on a streak again, as usual. You know, there's a team that's just remarkable. There's a team pretty much like the Oakland A's, except the Oakland A's discover their magic sometime around the middle of June. It takes Houston sometime around the middle of August or even late August to discover their magic. And here they are again this year, making that last-minute surge to make the playoffs. And here they come again with that stellar pitching staff. Even losing Brandon Backey, they're still solid right now with pitching. And if they get any kind of offense at all and continue to generate this offense during the next couple of weeks of the season, they've got an excellent shot at making the playoffs and representing the National League.
8 teams are separated by 4 games. San Diego leading Cincinnati and Philadelphia by half a game. Marlins 2 games back. Astros 2.5 along with the Giants. Arizona 3.5 and Atlanta 4. The Rockies are only 6 out, but they're obviously in 9th place here in this particular wild card standing race. Ralph, since you mentioned the Astros, the team they took on last night was the New York Mets, and Tom Glavine for New York made the start fresh off the DL, allowing 6 runs over 5 innings. However, that New York bullpen that we have alluded to many times throughout the course of the summer was awesome last night. Chad Bradford, Guillermo Mota, Aaron Heilman. Billy Wagner did struggle a bit, allowing an earned run in his only inning, but he recorded his 33rd save. How worried are you about the Mets starting pitching staff, considering that the bullpen has been so strong? It seems the Mets starters don't have to go too many innings before they get some very effective pitching from guys right behind them.
Well, that's the whole key. That's the whole key, exactly. I mean, what kind of a pitching staff are the Mets going to put together for the month of October? Obviously, the numbers you just mentioned for Tom Glavine don't give him the key to the Hall of Fame. They don't give him the key to the Cy Young Award this year. No question about that. We don't know what kind of a situation Pedro Martinez is going to come in when he comes back. So, I mean, it's a situation right now. This team, can they depend upon the bullpen day in and day out? I don't think so. They've got to get some starting pitching, John. It's a little too late in the season to put together a starting pitching staff, especially one that's going to take you deep into the playoffs during the month of October. So it's a situation. We talked about this the other day with some of the writers, the beat writers of the Colorado Rockies, and Troy Rank in particular. And we looked at this thing. We said, well, how far can this team go? Because we are very, very impressed. Again, it doesn't take someone with a great deal of mental acumen to tell you that the Mets are a good baseball team. I mean, come on, they're a solid team from position 1 to position 8 in the lineup. The pitching staff obviously is the key to the situation, as it is in so many cases. But their starting pitching right now is just barely good enough to get through a ball game. As you pointed out, the bullpen continues to bail them out day in and day out. And Billy Wagner, while Billy Wagner seems to be struggling, Billy Wagner still knows how to pitch and still knows how to get that big out. But Heilman, and I'll tell you, Bradford is really, really impressive. I mean, this crazy delivery of his, as you well know, I mean, it's almost below side. I mean, it reminds you of that Japanese pitcher in the WBC who basically scraped his fingernails on the mound every time he released a pitch. And this Bradford comes from that direction. And for 2 innings or 1 inning, he can really be a very, very difficult a right-handed pitcher for anybody to handle. So this team is going to depend upon the bullpen until the pitching staff gets healthy, John. But they certainly still they can make an impact. I don't think there's any question about that, even with a weakened pitching staff because of the strength of their offense.
The Mets have the biggest division lead in the National League at 16 games over the Philadelphia Phillies. By the way, I'm John Beltran with Major League Baseball insider Ralph Widlic here on Sports Saturday as we talk baseball until the top of the hour. The biggest division lead, Ralph, in the American League belongs to the Oakland A's at 8.5 games. Now, it was a couple of Sundays ago. I'm watching ESPN, and you and I already had the Chipper Jones Hall of Fame possibility conversation, and Steve Phillips was the one, the ESPN analyst, who brought up Chipper Jones's name. He also brought up the name of Frank Thomas, Ralph, who continues to put up monster numbers this year. And at least for him at this stage in his career, I consider them monster numbers because the guy obviously appeared to be washed up after all the injuries he suffered with the White Sox the last 2 or 3 years. He's got 477 career home runs. He was one of the most feared hitters in the early to mid and even late 90s. Do you consider him Hall of Fame potential, considering also that he's only 23 home runs shy of 500?
You know, you've got to look at the numbers and you got to say yes. You know, seriously. And the hardest thing about all of this, John, when you talk about players like Frank Thomas, you tend to forget the past and you focus on the present. And you recognize the fact that Frank Thomas basically is nothing more than a designated hitter these days. But you also recognize the fact that he still remains a good hitter, a feared hitter. And yes, he's putting up some very, very nice numbers in the DH role for a team that seems to be on the roll as well, the Oakland A's. But where do you go from there? I mean, that's the whole thing. You've got to bring the numbers out. You've got to bring the numbers out as he was a starting first base, one of the most feared hitters in the American League when he was starting with the Chicago White Sox, and he was a healthy Frank Thomas. And when you put the two together, when you take a look at his past and you take a look at the fact he's putting on some decent numbers now, you've got to say, yeah, he's a legitimate candidate. It's hard in many respects to really put that together because your mind doesn't work that way. You've got to go back to the future, as they say, in a sense. But you got to look at that and say, recognize this. This guy was a terrific hitter. At the present time, he's just a good hitter. But there's nothing wrong with just being a good hitter. But being a fantastic hitter that he was, of course, he's a candidate for the Hall of Fame. But again, he's not one of these guys that you're going to say first ballot Frank Thomas as soon as he comes off. But as soon as he's eligible, and we're talking years from now. But still, yeah, he's a legitimate candidate. And Steve Phillips, I think, has made a good case for him. I really do.
Ralph, the A's are 33-13 since the All-Star break. Just amazing. The best record in baseball. I mean, last night they've got a guy in Antonio Perez in the lineup who's hitting .086. Mark Ellis at .241. Marco Scudero at .243. The power-hitting Nick Swisher, who can't hit for average, at .247. The best hitter last night, unbelievably, not even at .300, was Jay Payton at .298. how is this team getting it done, Ralph, when you look at those particular numbers? Then you look at a team like the Rockies, who've had 300 hitters throughout the course of the year and can't get it done. It's just amazing to me how the A's are this good, 20 games over 500 since mid-July.
Well, we get back to the numbers game, and baseball is a numbers game, as we well know. I mean, this is a team, the Oakland A's, that hit with men on base, they hit and score with men in scoring position, that can make the smart play, that can get that man from second or third week and score on a fly ball. I mean, they do all the little things right, John. They do them number one correctly. They do the job. The Colorado Rockies, on the other hand, they can load the base up as no outs, as we well know, and not score a run.
Right.
They don't have the ability to get that runner across the plate, and that is the difference. There's no question about that. That is an unbelievable difference, because when you take a look at batting average, you say one versus the other. I mean, take a look at Garrett Atkins, for example, batting pretty solid 316. You take a look at Eric Chavez, his counterpart with the Oakland A's, is batting all of 243, and you say there's no comparison here. But then you talk to any major league manager out there, any major league GM, any major league scout, and say, which third baseman would you rather have? And I don't think there's any question in my mind. Eric Chavez would stand up, and that's my job. I'm the third baseman, and that's the way this team continues to succeed, to produce winners year in and year out. They do all the small things properly, correctly. They know how to win games. The Rockies have struggled all season long in doing the little things correctly and advancing the runner, and they just don't know how to win. They just don't know how to win, John. And that comes with experience, but that comes with ability as well. You can talk about the youth on this team, but you've got to recognize the fact that, somewhere along the line you got to forget about youth and you've got to start talking about ability and getting the job done. And so far the Rockies are not doing that.
Yeah, I apologize for mentioning for mentioning the Rockies in that sense. I wanted to get away from them,
but
at least there's a correlation.
Comparison.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, the two best records in the American League, Ralph, belong to the Tigers at 84 and 51 and the Yankees at 80 and 53. I mentioned that because not too much was made of it after the doubleheader split earlier this week at Yankee Stadium, but that was a huge victory for the Tigers, and it's quite obvious, even though you, Pat, and I predicted that the Tigers would set a franchise record for wins this year at 104, it's probably not going to happen. They'd have to go 20 and 6. They have not played since they were 76 and 36 at the time we made that prediction, but now they've lost 15 of their last 23 games. Ralph, to me, that was a huge victory when Craig Monroe hit that 3-run homer with 2 outs in the ninth off Scott Proctor, because after all, even though these teams appear to have these divisions wrapped up, the Tigers only with a 5.5 game lead, they're still fighting for best record, and I think Detroit was feeling the pressure there, and Monroe, who's been a very underrated player, came through in that particular game, and that really could signal the difference between having home field advantage versus not, at least in the American League Championship Series.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, John. That was a major home run. I was watching the scoreboard very intently. I was at the Rockies game that night against the Mets, we call it the game, and I was looking at the scoreboard. And I thought, I'm figuring, right, it looked like they can go into the 7th inning, 8th inning, Yankees still have the lead. I'm thinking, well, there's no way they're going to lose this thing. And they did, and it was a major game. And I think if you go back, and we will, and we'll probably get a soundbite somewhere down the line from Mr. Jim Leland at the end of the season and ask him what game did he think turned the season around, if in fact a question like that is asked, and it should be. I think it's got to go back to the game the other day that you referred to, John. I think it was a major victory, especially when you take a look at this fact that this is a young team that suddenly, because of the fact that you just pointed out, they've had some miserable games in the last several weeks. The one-loss record is pathetic. They've really come up against some teams that are ready for them, playing very good baseball. They faltered. The Tigers have. This was a major turnaround for a young team. I mean, that was a major lift because I think they started to doubt themselves a little bit, and that's always the case with a younger team. And it takes an experienced manager such as Jim Leland, who is not one of my favorites. But the fact of the matter is, he got that team going back on the right keel. That was a major victory for them, and I think you're going to see this team play much better ball now for the rest of the season, because I do believe that was a turning point late in the season. There always seems to be a turning point game, and we refer to this virtually every year about a team coming through with a major victory, come from behind, usually victory, on the heels of a losing streak or on the heels of a streak where they haven't been playing good baseball, and especially a young team when they can turn it around, as the Tigers just did the other day. A great victory for them, a great victory for Leland, and as you said, really, obviously, Craig Monroe really stepped forward and did the job for them.
Ralph, you asked for it, and now you're going to get it.
Oh, hung in there long enough. We got a couple key walks there, to get some guys on the base. And Craig's done what he's been doing for quite a bit of the season. He came through big time for us, and that was obviously that was a big win for us.
Okay, I did make out at least half of that sentence, so that wasn't too bad for Jim Leland, Ralph. I mean, that's
it really wasn't bad at all.
That's
he was probably lighting up a cigarette at the time he spoke. I mean, he didn't have one in his mouth. I think that's why we understood him so well. But yeah, there's no doubt about the fact that. And hey, listen, again, and we've talked about this several times already today. Big victories come, and people step forward and do the job. And Craig Monroe has done a nice job for this team all season long. Not a big name. When you take a look at his numbers, middle 270s batting average, nothing really to write home about, but what a job he's done for this team. And as Jimmy Leland pointed out, and I use the term Jimmy, I don't know why I'm not that affectionate, but anyway, I use the word Jimmy, and I recognize the fact that Jimmy Leland is doing a heck of a job with this Detroit Tiger team. And yes, he pointed it out, a major victory for them. I'm
John Beltran with Major League Baseball insider Ralph Widlic on Sports Saturday, presented by High Plains Bank. And we could talk about the state of the Red Sox, Ralph, but we've only got a few minutes. We know that everything has been collapsing for them on the field and off the field, but apparently John Lester, their pitcher, who apparently has some form of lymphoma or something like that, is going to be okay. So, and he's only 22 years old, but David Ortiz, obviously in the hospital with heart palpitations, he's going to be okay. But let's look at the wild card situation, because wasn't it 2 weeks ago you and I discussed the Kansas City Royals and how they have affected the American League race? They beat the Twins 2 out of 3 games in Minnesota. Then they take out the White Sox last night, Ralph, and I wonder, is this more about Kansas City, because they also had swept the Red Sox earlier this year before that big-time series against the Yankees, in which the Yankees won 5 in a row, or is it more about Minnesota and the White Sox starting to get a little bit tight right now?
Well, I think the White Sox and Minnesota are getting a little tight right now, but let's go back to Kansas City. Right after the White Sox swept Detroit, they go into Kansas City and they split a 4-game series. I mean, Kansas City refuses to die. They really, truly refuse to die. It's a situation where you see them on a day-in and day-out basis that this is a team that seems that, basically don't have a whole lot of talent, but they're major leaguers. They've got some pride. They want to get the job done, and therefore they go out and get the job done. And the White Sox are faltering. Jose Contreras hasn't pitched well in a month, John. I mean, we got to realize that. I mean, this guy is really struggling. Minnesota. The story out of Minnesota right now is the fact that Radke more than likely is not going to be able to pitch the rest of the season, and that's horrible when you consider the fact that Liriano was virtually just a situation where he's not going to start. He had 45 pitches thrown the other day from a mound in 20 minutes, and he said that he thought he's ready to go. They can't force him back there, John. Both of these teams are struggling right now. The White Sox and Minnesota. I don't really think Minnesota losing Radke and Liriano can handle it, quite honestly. But the way the White Sox are playing, they don't seem to be able to handle the pressure either. But I don't think Boston's going to make the run. I think the White Sox are still going to be strong enough to emerge as the AL a wild card.
Well, Ralph, we know how brutal the Royals have been all season. But how about this? Since July 1st, the Royals are 23-34, and the Rockies are 21-33.
What does that tell you, John? John. We can't start off on the Rockies again, Jen. We've been talking about the Rockies for a half hour already.
But, it's just amazing how this situation continues to build in Colorado. Okay, let's address one more thing while we have a couple of minutes here in the Red Sox, since I just brought up a couple of points, Ralph, and I know that earlier this week that Pat O'Rourke was addressing the Red Sox and their state and where they could be in the next couple of years, considering that their best pitcher is 40-year-old Curt Schilling, and they had a major rehauling of personnel. They picked up quite a few of the Florida Marlins players, a new center fielder in Coco Crisp. But I don't think none of us anticipated this massive type of collapse by the Red Sox, even though they're still 73-62, but now pretty far away from the playoff chase. They're about 5.5 games off the wild card leading White Sox. In what direction do the Red Sox go, and do you see any significant changes based on that direction you're foreseeing?
Well, I think they have to go for pitching. There's no question about that. But they're not the only ones out there looking for pitching during the off season. Unfortunately for them, the Yankees will be looking for some starting pitching as well. And both teams have deep pocketbooks. So, in the fact that the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees can help themselves simply because they have the money to spend. they'll go out and spend the money and get the job done, in my opinion. But I think the Red Sox have to get some good, solid starting pitching. I think they've got to concern themselves right now with possibly what happened last night with Jonathan Papelbon, who obviously is a leading candidate for Rookie of the Year, possibly most valuable player in the American League. I mean, he's had an unbelievable season going into the game last night. His ERA was 0.93, John, with 35 saves. Now he's got some sort of an arm injury. We're going to have to determine how serious that is. I mean, if this guy is down for the rest of the season, John, this team doesn't have a ghost of a chance of representing the American League as a wild card, because they still do have a chance, but I don't think they will, simply because, as you chronicled just a few minutes ago, with all the injuries in this lineup, this team is going to be struggling. But they have got to do something. They're very disappointed in the outfield play of Coco Crisp and his production as a leadoff man. I mean, he is a poor man's imitation of Johnny Damon, obviously, and a very, very poor man, maybe a beggar's impression of a Johnny Damon. So Coco Crisp will not be a Boston Red Sox next year. He'll be shopped around. He might even end up with the Colorado Rockies, which would not be a bad thing. But I think they've got to make some overhauls. They've got to strengthen their outfield situation. They can't rely on Trot Nixon anymore. He's proven to be very, very prone to injuries, missing again a great part of this season, missing a great part of last season. He's hurting them quite well. They've got to look at a good, solid outfield production, and it might be in the form of Willie Mopena, who might finally get a starting job and play an entire season with the Boston Red Sox. They've got some work to do, obviously. They've got to back up Jason Varitek. They can't find themselves in a situation where they lose Varitek and have to stand by with a Javi Lopez, who really is not doing much of a job offensively or defensively. So they've got some shoring up to do, but not as much as we really think. A little pitching help they need, obviously. They've got to get some help in the outfield, as I mentioned, and I think they've got to get some secondary catching help. But I don't think it's a major overhaul. I really don't. I think they can live pretty much with what they have out there. And again, as I say, it's a nice situation that they're in because they have the money to spend and they've got a good farm system, John. So they can do the job next year. But this year, you pretty much have to count them out with the injuries that they've suffered. With really, when it's strange when you figure Ortiz, Pena, and Ramirez all went down virtually at the same time on the heels of Jason Varitek, and now the situation with Papelbon, and as you mentioned, Lester. I mean, it's a scary situation for this team right now, and it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for the fans in Boston, for the fans that put themselves in the seats every day in and day out, sell out crowds at Fenway Park. But they'll come back.
Excellent work by our Major League Baseball insider, Ralph Widlic. Once again, he'll be joining us during the week on 1010 Preps and More, which airs, of course, weekdays from 1 to 2. We'll be off on Monday for Labor Day, but we'll resume our show on Tuesday. Rockies and Dodgers tonight, second of a three-game set from Dodger Stadium. Opening pitch at 8:10. Rockies on deck at 7:30 right here on 1010. Chad Billingsley throws for the Dodgers and Aaron Cook at 9 and 12 for the Rockies. For Ralph, I'm John Beltran. You've been listening to Sports Saturday, brought to you by High Plains Bank on 1010 KSIR.